All right. Call this meeting of the House Appropriations Committee to order. This afternoon, we are joined by Dr. Daniel Greenstein, the Chancellor, Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. Welcome, Dr. Greenstein. In front of you, there's a timer. When the timer is green, our members will start to ask you questions. They will have 5 minutes to ask questions. When the timer turns yellow, that means that there are 30 seconds left. We ask that you would begin to wrap up your answers. And when the timer is red, that's when we will conclude with those answers. As always, I will allow the panel to complete their response, but I will caution members not to ask 5 questions in the last 30 seconds. Please speak clearly and directly into the microphone so that the folks at home can hear you. And before we begin, any comments from Chairman Grove? Dr. Greenstein, if you would stand so we can swear you in. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may begin with your opening statement.
So thank you, Chair and members. I appreciate the opportunity. I was reading this morning some research that was conducted actually 15 or so years ago, and it was about what happens when you invest in higher education, public higher education. And there were 2 takeaways. One of them was that if you invest in student affordability, you will see an uptick in enrollment. For every $1,000, it's a 1 to 2.5% probability of higher enrollment. If you invest in universities, the institutions, appropriation funding, you'll see improvement in student outcomes because universities are investing in their people and the work that they do. So we're part of a natural experiment here in the Pennsylvania state system with your partnership, is that we have seen significant increases in our investment, thanks to you and your colleagues, over the last couple of years, both in terms of our appropriation and in terms of our one-time funding. That has allowed us to freeze tuition for 6 years, in a row, so we've become more affordable. And what we're seeing in the Pennsylvania state system, and it's available to you in the reams of data that we supply you in the appropriations book, as we call it, is that both of those results are coming to pass, that there is now an opportunity 15 years later to update that research paper with the results of our natural experiment. We're seeing improvement in our enrollments because we're becoming increasingly affordable as we freeze tuition, and we're seeing improvement in our student outcomes, specifically in terms of retention. So I'm pleased to report that. Last thing I will say, chairs, is that it came to my attention this morning in that other place that there may be some interest in the governor's proposal about higher education. So I know that the governor and his folks have been consulting widely with a bunch of folks, and they're building the plans out as we speak. I know that Drs. Mumin and Shaw will be with you at a future date, and they will be able to answer all your questions. I will certainly do my best, but I want to manage your expectations, maybe in a way I should have done with the Senate, that the information that I have is the same information that you have. It's what's available to the public. So I just wanted to manage expectations up front, and thank you.
We'll start with Representative Fleming.
Good afternoon, Chancellor. Thank you for joining us today, right over here. We spoke last year about Mid-Penn Commonwealth, or Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania and Penn West University. And so the latest data we have access to is indicating that while enrollment at Commonwealth University is up, Penn West is still struggling in terms of enrollment. I just want to know if, and I know this is still very early in terms of this initiative, I will say. Can you tell us sort of what your thoughts are on why we are seeing a difference between enrollment ticking up at Commonwealth as opposed to, and we're not achieving the same success at Penn West?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't want to repeat a mistake I might have made earlier today. So what we're seeing at Commonwealth is improvement in first-time, full-time students, which is a leading indicator that good things will happen as the small classes exit and the bigger ones come in from behind. There's still a downturn in their overall enrollment as a result of those small classes still being in the pipeline. But the trends are positive. At Penn West, as you have pointed out, we have seen a couple of successive years of very disappointing enrollment, including last year. So I think there's a number of things going on. So one of them is that those schools, all three of them, were just in a much more challenging place than Commonwealth. But they've also approached the they've approached the integration in very different ways. Penn West sort of ripped the Band-Aid off all at once. They went directly into rebranding and marketing. They went directly into re-engineering all their technology platforms. They went directly into, more rapidly into rearranging the academic program array. So I think there was a lot of things going on in that first critical year, and they, to be perfectly honest, did not go all that well in a way that showed up in enrollments. As a consequence, the state system working, I think it was one of the best examples of being strengths of being a system, is that we just reached across the system, identified very talented, the best and the brightest, and many of them from Westchester. Thank you, Westchester. And then just sort of sent them to Penn West and did a fundamental and complete kind of a reset, working very closely with obviously with the Council of Trustees and in particular with the faculty leadership there. So, it's been a journey. Folks out there are doing, in my view, God's work. It's hard. I think, we're not out of the woods, but I have more optimism today than maybe I've had for a while, this time last year, put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, we discussed this last year, as I said, and I'm on record as I think the whole thing was hasty, to be quite frank. The whole execution was hasty on both accounts. I think if you had plans to integrate, that's fine, but I just think it came together far too quickly, and I'll just restate that. The other thing, as I talk to faculty at the state system schools, one of the things they're concerned about, and I know, and I believe the integration was done in part to save costs. But one of the things that I've heard from faculty is the proliferation of using contractors to do some work that you have to do, that the system has to do, or each university has to do. What goes into that decision in terms of using contractors versus the faculty that you're already paying in order to execute your mission?
Yeah. According to statute, university presidents have their role is basically as CEO of their university. They will make contracting decisions. The contracting decisions, they flow to the system office for legal review. Sure. The only contracting decisions that the system office would make would be for contracts with entities that are providing system-wide support.
Okay. And again, the PASHE system is far too important and far too critical for people like me, to be quite honest, who came from a low-income background. I'm a Millersville University graduate. The PASHE system allowed me to obtain higher education and achieve a measure of success in life. And so I think we should continue to keep focused on that mission. And I wish you success going forward. Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Struzzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chancellor. It's been a long journey. I think that a number of us who have sat on this committee for a number of years have been there with you. I know that it's been hard work. I know that turning the state system as you have has been a monumental effort. And, from those of us, again, who have been here for a long time, understand that it's moving in the right direction, that we have done the heavy lifting, and that we were getting to the point where we were seeing the results. And then the rug is pulled out from under your feet. I think a lot of us were shocked with the press release related to realigning higher education. Called a blueprint, but I haven't seen a blueprint yet. And so I know we're going to go down this path because we have to. And as I have IUP in my backyard of my office, literally, I have deep concerns with this proposal, as do many of my colleagues. But again, this is a budget hearing. And so earlier, I think actually even in last year, the state system proposed an increase in funding, and I believe the Board of Governors approved that request.
Correct.
For $423 million, a $38 million increase, 6.5%, that would allow you to freeze tuition. On top of that, then the governor puts out his press release, and the only line item in the budget for the Apache system and community colleges, to my knowledge, for $974 million combined, which is roughly a 15% increase. Again, this is a budget hearing, so help us understand which budget request you're supporting today.
Oh, boy. So, until... Anybody else want to take this chair? So, look, my job is as CEO of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. It currently has 85,000 or some odd students, head count, and they need our help, and they need your help. And so the budget that we presented, which was a 6.5% increase, was basically wash, rinse, repeat of last year. It is the money that would allow us to buy down a tuition increase for the 6th consecutive year. So that is, so long as the system continues to exist as the system that I know, that is the funding that we need in order to achieve that outcome.
Well, I appreciate that. But that said, though, the governor is still out there pushing for this new plan. I think it's a bit premature from my perspective. I did a Zoom call last week with the administration, and I thought that they were going to share some details with me. Instead, they asked me for my opinion. And it's hard to give your opinion on something you don't fully understand, how they're going to integrate, how it's going to work. What input or did you play any role in developing this proposal?
So I know the governor's folks have been consulting with a variety of people. I was convened with the other higher ed leaders in Pennsylvania. You know, we had the state-related, we had the ACUP for the privates, we had the community colleges represented. The kind of discussions that some of you will have participated in when we did the State Board of Higher Education Master Planning was that group, basically. And we had some I thought, very productive discussions at a pretty high level, mostly principle-driven, about principles of affordability, workforce alignment, and performance, formulaic ways of funding higher education. There wasn't a lot of detail. I know that there are groups being convened currently to flesh out some of the detail that we're looking for, and obviously look forward to seeing that as it emerges.
Now, from your perspective, and I'm not saying we don't need to look at higher ed as a whole. We've had those discussions as well for a number of years. What benefit would you see to back up a second, I know that we have articulation agreements with many of our community colleges and the state system, but what benefit would you see in combining community colleges with the state system?
So I'm going to try to answer this question as a higher ed person who's been involved in a number of different systems. Systems can have any number of benefits, and I can speak about the benefits we get from being a system at Apache. Obviously, there are efficiency gains to be had through, shared service opportunities. I think one of our biggest benefits we're about to realize, we're seeing it at the integrated universities, is program and course sharing. Students anywhere in the system should be able to have access to programs and courses elsewhere in the system. We're putting in place an infrastructure to support that holistically across the universities. You can see we're leveraging our system, the fact that we're a system, to basically accelerate the pace of innovation, to upskill our people. We focused on the things that we needed to focus on, financial sustainable budgeting, how to manage an academic program array in the new world. We're now moving into an enrollment management, and there are other areas. We bring the best and the brightest of us together, and we create these sort of expectations of one another that we then implement. So all of those things are powerful advantages that systems can bring. And those are the ones that we have brought from at PASHI. So I'm sure there are others that I haven't named, but the question, I guess, would be: so what is it being designed? What is the system designed to accomplish? And is it the right design to accomplish whatever the objectives are? I would remind you may not remember that we ended up redesigning our system in 2018-19 because it was not structured adequately to deal with the twofold problems that we take: financial stabilization and credentialing productivity. I believe we've done the redesign to address those issues, and you're seeing the results.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Young.
Good afternoon, Chancellor. What is the value of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus? What is PASHI doing to improve the environment and educational experiences for the students who are on campus currently? And how are you preparing for future students to attend campus?
So let me start with the value question. I think there's two. So one of them is that, it's in Title VI. We have a Title VI obligation to ensure that everybody has access, right, to an environment, which is, but it's not about Title VI. It's the right thing to do, right? So through a lens of being, fair to the people of Pennsylvania and to being open to all the people of Pennsylvania and available to them, it's the right thing to do. So you can approach it through that lens. Through the second lens, it's a workforce development thing, right? We're way short of the workers that we need in the economy that we have. 60% of today's jobs require someone in them with a post-secondary education, of which only 51% have. It's a pure math problem. Unless we open the doors to historically underserved population, underrepresented minority, low income, rural, adults, we can't make up the gap. We just can't. So whether you come at this as a fairness thing or you come at this through an economic development thing, you get to the same answer. People aren't going to show up on campus if they don't feel welcome there. And that doesn't, it's about their, yeah, I'll leave it there.
I appreciate the passion. However, I'm still listening to hear.
Second part, what are we doing
Okay.
about it? So a number of things. We've been very proactive, and actually, for the first time since I have been here, we are seeing attainment gaps that have existed between Pell and non-Pell, which is low income and not low income, and between underrepresented minority and non-underrepresented minority. Persistence rates have begun to shrink. The gap has begun to shrink. A couple points, 1.5 points in one, 2 in the other. That's fantastic, and that represents the work that we're doing through student support, student success, and there's any number of different strategies, investing significantly, improving the kind of supports we provide all of our students, but in particular those underrepresented low-income students. We have totally retooled our codes of conduct so that it's not only wrong to behave like an idiot, it's now in contravention of our student code of conduct. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot more to do. This is a big challenge, but I'm pretty confident that we're making progress.
So interestingly enough, I mentioned what you're going to do, what is happening with diversity and inclusion, and you immediately went into socioeconomic classes. So I'm not necessarily thinking specifically about those people who are lower income. I'm thinking about students of color. And not all students of color on your campuses are low income. So how are you creating a safe environment for them?
So I didn't mean to, that was not my intent. My intent was to say that when you're talking about inclusion, it is holistic inclusion, right? That we need to make everyone feel comfortable depending on whether it's demographic characteristic or it's age or veteran populations, et cetera. So inclusion is a holistic thing. What are we doing specifically for underrepresented minority students? And again, it varies by campus, but I mentioned the work on the student codes of conduct. We've been very active in the development of multicultural centers, which reach out directly to underrepresented minority students. We've been through using student fees, investing in student associations that directly align with interests of those students. Sorry, the well hasn't gone completely dry, but it's got. Yeah. Let me leave it there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We thank the gentlelady. Representative Mostello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chancellor. I have a multi-part question here.
My favorite.
First of all, where does our faculty compensation package rank in comparison to other similar universities and systems throughout the U.S.? Where do we stand?
So we actually just benchmarked this again last year. We're at about 106, 110%. There's some differentiation by category, so what specific level of faculty we're talking about. And there's some regional variation as well, because obviously cost of living is different in different parts of Pennsylvania, but that's roughly, that's a reasonable average.
Now, from what I understand is the employee costs in PASHE represent about 75% of the system's total cost, and the faculty costs are the biggest part of that. Now, without disclosing any sort of, any labor agreements that you have, the tentative ones happening now, how much of your request is simply maybe a pass-through to the employees, and how much is actually going towards the students? Because you just said moments ago to Representative Struzzi's concerns, students need help. So how much of that money is going to actually go to the students? And how do you plan to address any of these costs?
So I can't speak to the agreements because they're still yet to be, many of them are still yet to be ratified. But I can tell you that in planning for the agreements, we did a few things. It was a principle-based set of decisions, analytically driven. What does it mean to be fair, right? You need to compensate people fairly. And what does it mean to be fair within our institutions? You don't want to sort of compensate one category of employee at vastly different rates than another. It introduces invidious distinctions which aren't healthy. And then we asked the radical question, what can we actually afford? And there we were basically doing historical forecasts of state appropriations, tuition increases, et cetera. And the idea was to get to numbers which were fair and affordable. In terms of your specific question about how much goes to the faculty and how much goes to the students, it's almost an impossible question to answer, and here's why. Because our faculty are the direct avenue into our student, right? So investment in your faculty is an investment in your student, if that makes sense. They are responsible for the intellectual care and feeding and the educational development of our students and for their success. So it's, yeah.
So if any of these increases are granted, are you going to entertain any discussions on possible salary freezes for any of the, for durations of the contracts for the administrative or non-represented employees?
No, that goes to fairness part two.
Okay. And then I have a question about the PASHE negotiating teams. Do they benefit at all? Do they have a financial interest in any sort of increases that faculties receive, that the faculty may receive from any increases in their contracts?
No.
They don't get anything?
The members of the management team,
Yes, in the negotiations.
they get to hang out with me.
How much is that worth?
That's a lot.
Is it? Okay. Is that worth the 75%? Okay.
That's, let me tell you, the management, both teams, they work really hard. I had the pleasure of doing it the second time, and that's hard work, and it's good work, and I'd like to think it was productive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I think that's all I have. Thank you so much, Chancellor.
Thanks so much.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, good afternoon. I have two questions, so I'm hoping we can divide our time evenly. The first one's sort of the strategy level. The governor's released economic development strategy. I'd love to know how your vision for PASHE works into that and builds, opportunity across Pennsylvania. So Just a vision statement.
Sorry, to the gentleman's question, the first question I received, you know, the Pennsylvania State System universities are a jewel in the crown of Pennsylvania. I mean, we're really good at what we do. You know, most of our students come from Pennsylvania. Most of our students stay in Pennsylvania. Most of our students get great jobs, and they contribute back to their community. And we have, over a number of years, and certainly since I've been here, we continue to evolve our programs so that they are aligned very closely with workforce need. We partner intensively with employers through apprenticeships, through a variety of different kinds of partnerships. I was on a visit to Millersville with a bunch of folks a couple weeks ago, and I was just stunned walking around. We were touring the College of Science and Medicine. Chair, you're gonna love this. And the people I'm with, I can tell they're blown out of the water, because whether you go to biology or meteorology or robotics, there's employers standing there, and they're investors basically, and they're pulling our students through our universities into their jobs. And I'm like, and everybody I'm with is, they're blown out of the water because they expect to see what they're in their head is a teacher's college. We're not like that. We are like that at Millersville. Of course, it's one of our many great universities, Chair, but that's happening all across the system. So we're here. I mean, and we're kind of open for business, and we're pretty good at that.
Which is a perfect lead-in to my more specific question around workforce shortages, because I don't want to sort of underrepresent the teachers and the nurses and the first responders and the things that are sort of were more of a traditional role. So what's your play? What's the piece for PASHE to support Pennsylvania?
So
with teachers in those workforce areas.
Sure. I mean, as with teachers, we're working as closely with PDE to try to create alternative pathways for people into the profession. With first responders, we're doing some great work up at Commonwealth University, where we have an Act 120 program, where we're making the Act 120 available to we're encouraging people who are studying criminal justice to get the Act 120 certification. We're giving people who are coming through the Act 120 programs credit for their work in Act 120 so they can complete a degree in criminal justice, social work, or anything else. And with nurses, we're working very closely with healthcare providers. This one, to me, is the biggest struggle. I mean, you're talking to people, the numbers they're showing us, the shortages they're experiencing, like today's shortages, are just, you know this, they're mind-boggling. Yeah. So we're as active as we can be in all those areas.
So active as we can be. How do we incentivize that? How do we?
So I think it's different. So, you know, the bottlenecks, if I can call them that, with teachers, frankly, the cost of the education versus the starting salary, the ROI is not very strong. It's same in social work. In nursing, you know, the ROI, if I can call it that, is there. But the bottleneck tends to be a shortage of difficulty in getting clinical placements. And actually, believe it or not, difficulty in getting clinical faculty to teach. So, and that's the nature of the conversations we're having with a variety of healthcare providers to see ways that we can partner to overcome those kinds of those pinch points.
Thank you. I think, speaking from my perspective, the salary issues, the quality of and safety of work standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those aren't your issues in developing a teacher or a nurse, but certainly for the rest of us in the room, those are policy issues we have to come to deal with.
To remind folks who may have forgotten, last year we came forward with a budget proposal which actually would have taken $100 million and directed it to students to incentivize them going into high-need, high-risk, lower-pay occupations, teaching, nursing. I think there was a few others in there. Social work was certainly in there, public service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Eric Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over here. Good to see you. And full disclosure, you know, I'm a pro-PASHE kind of guy, IUP graduate, you know, former employee. Wanted to ask a little bit about the governor's proposal where he floated an idea of $1,000 tuition to select students. In your discussions with the governor, did he say, is this going to apply for just the first year, or would this be all 4 years?
So I think this is a question you're going to want to put to the administration. I don't have the details about the about the plan and the expected expenditure.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be lacking a lot of details. But your report's to appropriations did not. You had substantial information, four of, a 6-page summary, 138 data page. And I just, my understanding is that whatever that $1,000 would be, would really only apply to 1 out of every 11 families. And, as a father of 7, I have 4 kids in college right now. My wife and I don't work. I mean, my wife and I both work, so that's how we got those 7.
You call
I
this
gotta
work?
tell you.
Okay.
That's a story for a different day. But, so, singing some praises of PASHE, and when we talk about all those 80,000 PASHE students that we have, like PASHE is outperforming the national average, right? 3 out of every 4 students come back as sophomores, but we're still losing 1 out of 4 that don't return and get that $22,000, ticket. But then when we look at the number of years it takes to get a degree, again, PASHE is outperforming both our national schools and ranks. 4 out of every 10 students, it takes 6 years to get them across. And we're doing better in PASHE than some of these other schools. Can you touch on, a policy or program that would be able to help all 85,000 students addressing the number of years to graduation, and this is at a time in dual enrollment where, again, all students at all income levels would be able to get prepared for college, because that seems to be one of the most successful indicators to get them across the finish line in 4 years. Can you touch on $1,000 to a select few that nobody knows how we're going to pay for, or maybe some enhanced policies to help all students?
So when I advise people about affordability policies, I always I urge them to be clear about their goals, because the policy will look different depending on what your goals are. So we spoke a moment ago about, you could call it an affordability policy, which incentivizes people to go into different professions, right? Would look very different than an affordability policy, which was free college for all, which, and they have different objectives. So I think the key thing is to clarify the objectives, and then what we would typically do is back in the day when I was at a different place, is you'd build an analytical model, and then you'd use the analytical model to pour money through it and see whether or not it was likely to achieve your objectives. If I was doing
jumping in on that time, and I agree with you, trying to balance analytics and families that really are suffering under elevated tuition costs. It's great PASHE's held their tuition line. If 6 out of 10 kids are, we're not graduating soon enough, that's enormous savings for everybody. And why not enhance our dual enrollment opportunities in high school so that they're better shored for success and graduating in 4 years?
Dual enrollment, community college transfer, if the objective is time to degree, efficient use of taxpayer dollars, that would be another set of policy objectives and would result in a different kind of policy, yeah.
I appreciate that, because I would almost envision if the hundreds of millions that it would take to pay $1,000 for a year or the first 4 years, or is he going to include those extra 2 years that nobody talks about? Or could we invest that in other areas where all of Pennsylvania would be able to participate? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Kincaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, I have to say I'm actually pretty excited about the governor's proposal to integrate our community colleges and the PASHE system, because I feel like I have been at war with you and your administration in trying to get the PASHE system to acknowledge that community colleges are accredited by the same body and that community college students should be able to transfer their credits to our PASHE system much more easily in order to keep students in Pennsylvania. And more and more students leave Pennsylvania because they would rather pay additional money to be out-of-state students than to have to repeat courses that should be accepted, but we have this onerous articulation agreement. So I'm excited about this plan because I think that this does justice to our students in Pennsylvania in a way that the PASHE system has been doing a great disservice to them. What I find myself with very little sympathy for your frustration around not having information about what this plan is going to look like, because this is the plan that you gave us for the consolidation. There are 52 pages of actual plan in there. There's over 400 pages in here. It is completely lacking substance, and we had this discussion during our hearings on the consolidation where it was raised over and over and over again that this plan did not have any substance to it. There was nothing that actually allowed people to figure out what the issues were. So I guess my question in this is, what have you learned from the process of the consolidation, and what are you going to do better when it comes to approaching this plan that the governor has proposed of consolidating our community colleges with the PASHE system so that we do better service to our unions, to our students, to our faculty, to Pennsylvania? What are you going to do better?
Thanks for that. So I guess I think you're asking about lessons learned. I think three, and I think I said this earlier today. I think one of them is you can't communicate enough. You just have to, and you have to engage stakeholders widely, broadly, et cetera. So I think that was a critical piece. I think you have, and I think we did okay there. I think we, and I know there are different points of view. I think it's really important to be absolutely crystal clear about your goals. And in terms of, what is one trying to accomplish when, doing X. I think we were actually okay there too, and I understand there, of course, there are different points of view. I think it's really important to evaluate risks, to do a risk analysis, and I think we did an okay job there too, and which is more than just identifying what the risks are. It's like, what are the risks? What are the
Chancellor, I'm going to interrupt here. I don't hear anything in what you're saying that says what it is that you're going to do better or what your even lessons learned are, because what you say repeatedly is that we did a good job. We did a good job with that. I think we did a good job with that.
You got to let me get to the end.
We'll get to the end.
Okay. So I think the risk analysis was important because it enabled us to identify where and when we needed to pivot and how. And then I think the area where we could have, the lesson learned was the capacity analysis. Is there the execution capability? Does it exist consistently, holistically across, the affected institutions? If I had to do it all over again, I would have spent more time there.
Would you spend more time talking to stakeholders?
I think on that one we spoke. There's an insatiable appetite for consultation and communication. I think we spoke to a lot of stakeholders. Yeah.
I would encourage you to include the legislature in more of these conversations, because there was a lot of conversations at us and not a lot of conversations with us. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Kutz.
Thank you, Chairman. Chancellor, thank you for being with us again. As you're aware, the cost of higher education is becoming crippling for so many looking to get their degree and everything. So focusing on that, and obviously the goal coming out with a degree to be able to join our workforce, I know that our employers in the Commonwealth are very concerned about workforce development and finding enough people who have the skills for the positions that they have available. Chancellor, could you tell me, why is an investment in PASHI a good investment for workforce development for the Commonwealth?
Well, a number of reasons. So one of them is for every dollar the state invests, there's eightfold increase in economic impact. $8 for every dollar invested is a pretty good return. There's good ROI for the students. Students who graduate are going to earn just south of $1 million over a lifetime, more than if they stopped out at after high school. I mean, stop their education after high school, and it's a great investment for the for the state, because of the students that we graduate tend to stay in Pennsylvania and work here and contribute to their communities.
So, and I appreciate, all those points, particularly the last one, as we see Pennsylvania's population trend kind of go in the wrong direction here, just growing, just not at a pace of some of our neighboring states, wanting to make sure that our students, that we're not just educating them with state tax dollars and then they go elsewhere, I think is the case in a lot of cases. So it's great to see the PASHI system have such a retention rate for people who stay in Pennsylvania and stay in our workforce years after graduation. So I appreciate your efforts on that. Let me follow up with how our workforce is changing. We have new sectors, new technological advancements, AI, robotics, manufacturing, all sorts of things.
We're going to face this year because the federal government has said that that information won't be out until the first half of March, which is a little delayed, obviously. So what kind of challenges is that going to face universities? Is it going to delay financial aid? PASHI, how are you guys handling that?
So we just actually met with the presidents a week or so ago, and everybody is either already on a rolling admission cycle, so they'll just continue to do admissions on a rolling basis, or they're going to push their deadline for packaging first-time students to at least May 15th, and I say at least because it builds in some flex. The critical thing, and I read something this morning which frankly I found a little alarming, the critical thing is to encourage students to fill out the FAFSA, however much of a difficulty it is. And the number I saw this morning, which was this time last year, 17 million FAFSA applications had been completed, and now I think I saw the number was 5. So that's, talk about leaving money on the table, but potential significant impacts on enrollment.
Do you have concerns with maybe students not enrolling or delaying enrollment? I mean, that seems to me, obviously, sometimes people wait for the financial aid package to decide, what kind of concerns do you have there?
I do, and this is also the cohort of students who started high school in the first year of COVID. It's like, how much more can you give on this cohort? Yeah.
Sure. So, I guess that's something we'll have to continue to monitor, and hopefully, if there's ways that we can encourage students to still apply for FAFSA, but also making sure they're waiting. And I think I got a little extra time, but just one quick follow-up here. I appreciate you being here and kind of highlighting, being an advocate for the PASHI system and really standing, taking your position. The governor's put out a plan that I think is unfortunate based upon a lot of testimony today, that I think was well intended, but isn't ready for prime time. Hasn't met with. It doesn't sound like he's met with the stakeholder groups to really be able to push that. I recognize my colleague from Lackawanna, said this is a starting point. I respect that, but hopefully the governor does bring the stakeholders to the table here, and we can find out some of those details like Representative Kutz was highlighting, and what is that income threshold in. I think there's a lot here and some concerns, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We thank the gentleman, Representative Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chancellor, for your time this afternoon. Chancellor, I was going to ask you about the blueprint. It doesn't seem like you have a lot of information on that, but I'm definitely keenly aware of how this blueprint is going to impact the Latino community in the Commonwealth, the fastest growing demographic in the Commonwealth. I'm going to move on with my questions in terms of, in the governor's budget address, he talked about paying for performance and budget performance outcome-based funding. And so I'm just interested, how exactly is that going to work in an academic setting?
So I can't speak to the governor's plan. That's something you'll put to the administration. I can speak to the way we do performance-based funding. We've had 2 regimes of it, if I can call it that, since I've been there. The first one was not very successful, to be honest. And I think it was not very successful because it was trying to optimize for too many things, had too many measures. The second one, which was developed by our presidents and others a couple years ago, which has now been in operation, was really very targeted. It's very focused on enrollment. and it was focused on enrollment, but also enrollment of low-income, underrepresented minority students, and it gave we get premiums and a bump for retention. So it's creating an incentive structure financially to encourage universities to do the right thing by their students. And we're actually seeing, I mean, it's a factor in our enrollment growth. I'm convinced of it. And I'm also convinced it's a factor in the fact that our underrepresented minority retention is now closing the gap with the non-underrepresented minority. So I think it's working.
Now, in your opinion, obviously, hypothetically, because of course the system doesn't exist yet, but if the system were to exist and let's say a university is not meeting their performance-based metrics, are we saying here that that those universities will be cut in their appropriations on a year-to-year basis?
So I think that would be a decision for the board. And so let me tell you how we do this in the Pennsylvania state system. And I think one of the things we redesigned the system to do was to surround our universities with support. I mean, Penn West is a perfect example. Cheney is a perfect example. We surround our universities with support so that they can improve their performance. It's not a punitive kind of activity. It's like, you missed on your enrollment, you're bad, right? You missed on your enrollment, how can we help? And I think that's one of the benefits of our system, at least. Again, that's the way that we operate. I can't speak to how others might.
Well, it's definitely concerning to me, and I definitely don't want to go down that slippery slope of taking away money from our institutions because they have a couple of bad years. So that's definitely something that I want to address as a committee moving forward. I want to move on with the time that I have because this is something that was brought to our attention during our briefing this morning, and I thought it was something that I'd like to hear your opinion on. And so that is on the trend that's depicted on Figure 17 of your appropriations request document, which shows that since 2018, enrollments for students has increased for students of families that make $110,000, but have decreased over 32% for students of families with incomes of $110,000, of which many of the families of which I represent. So it's clear that the higher education is becoming increasingly unaffordable for middle and low income families. I know a lot of this is due to increased costs, but what will it take, Chancellor, to reverse this trend? And what type of other investments into the systems do we need? Do we need increased fee grants, or do we need a different combination of all of the above?
If you were speaking to Figure 17, the one that, that's affordability. I mean, you're just seeing we're pricing the proportion coming from households of below $110,000 is declining rapidly. Forget 70 or anything else. I mean, and that's purely affordability. We're pricing people out. And we are the most affordable option. We've frozen tuition for 6 years, which is why when I said, I don't feel frustration about the governor's proposal, because affordability is a big deal. We got to nail this down. And the result of not nailing it down is you see those trend lines continue. And if you see those trend lines continue, you're back to the question of where do we get our nurses and our teachers and our social workers and our security forces and from. People can't go to college if they can't afford it.
I mean, and so what are the solutions to that? Because of course, these are people that are in my district, people in Bradford County, people in York County. I mean, these are poor, low-income individuals that are priced out of our system.
So I see two, again, to the research I sort of started with, I think there's two garden variety. It's a both-and approach. So one of them is invest in students. I mean, again, choose your affordability plan.
But is that more FIA grants? Is that an increase to FIA grants? Is that broadening the base so that more students apply for it? I mean, what exactly can we do to help you bring down the costs?
So I guess all of the above. And I mean, this is where you guys come in, and I'm happy to advise. There's pros and cons, but getting money in the hands of students is really important. The second thing is investing in institutions. What you discover when you invest in students, direct to student aid of some form, however distributed, enrollment goes up. What you discover when you invest more in institutions, outcomes improve. You need both those things. You need people to attend, and you need them to get through. And so they're two different kinds of investment strategies, but they're both required. And we're kind of a natural experiment because on affordability, we've frozen tuition for 6 years. We have gotten more affordable. Our enrollments have gone up. At the same time, we've invested more, thanks to you again, in our institutions. And as a consequence, our student outcomes have gone up. So we're kind of a natural experiment proving both of those things are true.
A lot more work to do. Thank you.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Chancellor, for being here today. Last year, we spent some time speaking about K-12 learning loss coming out of the pandemic. And at the time, you said that while most of your data was anecdotal, the concerns were both academic and behavioral. So we just wanted to check in on this issue. Now that we have another year of experience, are you continuing to see that type of evidence similar to what you had seen before? Is the situation better or worse than what you've expected?
I think it continues. I don't think I'm not aware of it being worse, but it's certainly not getting better. And what I see and hear and read is that those impacts will continue for some time. We just don't know what they will be yet, because students who were impacted in kindergarten, first grade, second grade are coming through the pipeline. They'll be with us in 10, 11, 12 years, and will understand better then what the kind of losses they have experienced. So I would expect this to continue to evolve. And we need to continue to, in effect, invest in ourselves. It goes back to the earlier comment, so that we can basically upskill ourselves, ensure that our employees are equipped as they need to be to manage the challenges that they're seeing on the ground.
I appreciate those comments, and I agree that there will be impacts for some time. There'll be a number of things probably that you'll be doing for years, unfortunately. Can you speak specifically to some of the things that the universities are doing now to help with that?
Yeah, so...
I was going to say, specifically how, when students are arriving at your campuses, how are you helping them to make up some of that ground? Because I know it's a tall order considering all the other things that you're trying to manage right now, but some specific instances might be helpful.
So it varies by university, but let me give you some garden variety examples. So where there's really significant need, academic preparedness, there are bridge programs of various kinds, summer bridge programs. A lot of our universities have redesigned or are redesigning what they call the first-year experience, so that they can engage with students directly, really providing them the skills they need to succeed in college, maybe less academic and more study skills and how to survive here. We're seeing a lot of early success with student success centers. Commonwealth University is set up. It's kind of a, Kutztown has one. It's kind of a one-stop shop. Go one place physically, and you'll see the range of help that you might need: financial aid, student advising, student success, financial aid, counseling, et cetera. Indiana University has actually just announced some very good results yesterday. They have what's called a Navigators program. Every student has a navigator, and the navigator is there to sort of help them navigate the school rather than have to have the student figure it out. Indiana just announced yesterday they saw a 6.5% improvement in their enrollments fall to spring over last year. And I asked the president, actually not about, he said there's been some growth there generally and improved outcomes. And, some of it's due to that. It's new, but so those are the kinds of things that we're seeing. And frankly, they're the kinds of things that you have enabled, because when you spent one-time funding and increased our appropriation, a boatload of money went into that kind of activity, student-facing support. It's really important.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us today. It's very important work, and I know it will continue, but it's great to hear those updates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the gentlelady, Representative Siegel.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Chancellor, for being here. I'm going to start by building off some of the comments that my colleague, Representative Mullins, made in terms of talking about the conceptualization of a lot of what we heard from the administration. And obviously, we don't have specifics, hard to call it a blueprint. Really, it's more of a nebulous concept. But in that concept, I think there are principles and priorities we absolutely all can get behind. And I want to start off first and foremost with the affordability component. You were here last year, and I remember distinctly that you brought up the Excelsior model that New York pioneered. Everybody who makes under $110,000 a year in the state of New York gets to go to college tuition free. We have a similar proposal in the sense it's sort of a Pennsylvania Promise Light model, but I would argue that here in the Commonwealth, we have historically failed on that metric of affordability and attainability. The number of students whose families earn less than $110,000 a year that attend our PASSHE system has declined by 32% since 2018. And we know that Pennsylvania families on average spend 50% of their income just to send their children to school. And that's the average income. In our black and brown communities, we know it's significantly higher. And I'm particularly sensitive to that as someone who represents the city of Allentown. So you've referred back and you've said you have to question the administration, you have to look at the administration, but I'm really curious to hear your advocacy for that particular proposal. I want to know that you're going to be a vociferous advocate at the table to make sure that that actually gets across the finish line. Not go back to the administration, ask the administration. I want to know that you personally will see to it that that remains a priority as we go through those negotiations so we do not continue to fail our kids.
Yeah, so I've known many of you for quite a long time, it seems, and we've been talking about affordability for forever, and it's super important. We've been talking about affordability and investment in our schools. It's what I live and breathe to do. And so it's the reason I'm not frustrated with the stage of the proposal's development now. It's because what a tremendous opportunity to have an all-up conversation about, what's the right thing to do for our students in our schools. I think it's fantastic.
Good. So you earlier talked about in order to get outcomes, you need to first determine what those outcomes are and the design policy approximated to achieve those ends. So in your assessment, this is absolutely the direction that PASHE ought to go in terms of making sure students' tuition is capped at a certain amount.
So we've been going in this direction for 5 years, at least, and probably longer.
Right. I'm not talking about capping tuition as in making it, freezing it. I'm talking about in literally reducing it. $1,000 per semester was the sort of suggested amount. I want to make sure that that is what you're suggesting is the direction, and that is what you want to see be done.
So just to remind folks, I think I was here last year advocating for $100 million direct investment in students. I was here 2 years before, for 2 years time before. The then governor had a proposal which was all about student affordability. I recognize it has its challenges. So I'm a strong advocate. When you ask me about a specific proposal, when you say $70,000, is that tuition free? Is it tuition, or is it tuition and fees, or is it tuition and fees, room and board? Is it a first dollar scholarship? Is it a last dollar scholarship? Until there are those kinds of, and I know those conversations.
Do you believe that we should get the out-of-pocket cost for our students as close to zero as humanly possible? Do you think that that would complement and achieve the objectives that you're up here saying that you want? Accessibility, affordability, the number of black and brown students that can attend our system. Is that the model? Is that the metric?
For all of our students or for some of our students?
Let's say the Pennsylvania Promise, $110,000 or below. Would you say that that's a sufficient metric?
110,000 competes, it's 125 in New York, competes
Sure,
aggressively.
great. Listen, I'm fine with 125. I'm simply saying, do you think that would you be comfortable with that? That would accomplish the goals that you're here espousing? Yes or no?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, it would accomplish the goal of making higher education more affordable for a vast swath of people who need it most, and
Perfect.
who we need most to get through the system so we can stock our.
I completely agree. Great. And then, as you know, only 20% of the cost of attending college is really tuition. So I think you would also argue that room and board, books and transportation, housing, those also form a critical component of making sure that kids get through college. Nearly 40% of the students that drop out of school cite financial difficulties. So I would hope that you would believe that the more comprehensive those cost reduction measures are, the better. Great. I'm going to move on to the second point. We talked about our coaches at the system and the importance of honoring those collective bargaining agreements. I want to talk more specifically about something that was struck on earlier. Look, I think for decades we have chronically underfunded our system of higher education, and the financial constraints and difficulties that we've had in balancing budgets is not because of some far-off financial crisis. It's political decisions we made here in the Commonwealth. I just want to hear you say that we will do our damnedest to honor our collective bargaining agreements when we go through this historic restructuring to make sure that we protect our faculty, because I don't think a system can work unless the people that work for it are invested in and valued, and I just want to make sure you have that commitment.
How could we not honor our contracts?
Well, I'm talking moving forward as we restructure the system, that we don't do it at the expense of folks. There was entertaining the idea that should we freeze salaries for our staff? I don't think we undervalue our employees and we cut our staff.
You never heard those words out of my mouth.
Perfect.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Owlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chancellor, for being here. It's very interesting, this hearing. From my perspective, this has been more of a brainstorming hearing than an actual budget hearing, because we don't have an actual document, like you said at the beginning, that we can actually talk through. We have some sort of a proposal, but it's really not even a proposal. The governor is saying that it will take us from 49th to 22nd, but we really don't even have a proposal. It's been called a blueprint. I used to work on houses and read blueprints all the time, and you could actually see the details right down to the exact measurements of what you need for any construction project with a blueprint. We don't have that. So this has really just been a brainstorming session as much as anything, trying to talk about higher education, which it's supposed to be a budget hearing. I wish we could talk about an actual plan, but we don't have that. So I would like to talk about what we do know right now, because we don't know if the blueprint, the plan, whatever you want to talk about, call it, is even going to happen. But talk a little bit about the articulation agreements that we do have right now with our community colleges and the working relationship that PASHE has with our community colleges today, because this is something we do know and something that we could actually talk about maybe moving forward with this budget.
Yeah, so as you know, or you may know, we redesigned our transfer policies, I think, a couple of years ago. They're obviously in place, and universities and colleges are working closely together. We're seeing stabilization in the transfer enrollments. That's a good thing. I mean, it's a year's worth of data. Let's hope it continues. But it could be a number of things. It could be tuition freezes. It could be the transfer agreements. But it's a promising sign. So I'm pleased about that. I think, our presidents worked very closely with the community college presidents. I guess it was over the last couple of years. They published a memorandum of understanding about a variety of things they could do together, which obviously included transfer articulation, but it went well beyond that. It talked about, coordinated approach to student advising and supports for students so that they could, move more seamlessly along that pipeline. And there's a handful of objectives that are well articulated there. Many of our universities are following up with a subset of those as makes sense in their districts. So, I think on the whole, that's good and that's promising. And, I look forward to the continued development there.
That's all I have. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Malagari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chancellor, for being here. I want to ask about affordability one more time, but my question is really about whether or not you believe that PASHE has enrollment declines beyond what might be expected due to demographics because of affordability. So how much more an allocation would it take to get the system to be more affordable for students?
Yeah, so
what's that number?
100%. I mean, the enrollment declines, especially the pattern that the gentleman referred to in Figure 17. The only way you can explain that pattern, and it is well in excess of the demographic decline, is with reference to affordability.
So how much more an allocation would it take?
So that's why I was, so this is not an exact science, right? The question is, how many more dollars would it take to increase the probability that a student who wouldn't enroll would more likely enroll? The number that I was quoting earlier shows that with $1,000, it increases the probability between 1.1 and 2.5%. What does that mean in terms of numbers? I don't have a clue, right? But I think there are ways to evaluate that, which is why, I was interested to see that the title of the bill that I think is being introduced or has been introduced as a pilot program. I think pilots are really important. You're dealing with a market and people's willingness to pay and price elasticity. I would want to really get in deep and really understand that before saying, hey, if we had $6,000 more per student, really good things would happen.
Okay.
Well, I know that's not the answer you were looking for.
I appreciate that. Let's switch gears. I want to talk to you about the 90 credit program that was floated out. I heard about it. And are you still exploring this pilot program to offer 90 credit bachelor degrees? And do you feel that this is really the right direction that we need to go?
We are not exploring it. I do think that reduced time to degree is absolutely critical. It gets directly at cost, to be perfectly honest.
So this isn't something that's being explored?
It is not something that's being explored.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Fleming.
Chairman. Hello again. So having an opportunity to reflect on your answer, and you'll have to forgive me because I was not here when the consolidation was agreed to legislatively. I was paying attention in my role at the time as a child advocate, but we really didn't do higher education advocacy, so please forgive me. But so in answer to my question, you mentioned the enrollment decline at Penn West was in part because they were not equipped to execute in a fashion that was necessary. It led me to wonder, as we talk about the consolidation of Commonwealth University and Penn West, what is what is the system's role? What is your role as the chancellor in helping that along? In other words, why were they allowed to flail and stumble in that fashion?
I think the point of my response was that they were not, and that as soon as we saw that this was going on, we intervened immediately.
And you intervened with the staff from Westchester and tried to course correct.
Correct.
And then, so moving forward, is that intervention still taking place?
Yeah, intervention might be a little bit rough, but yeah, I mean, there are still people on the ground who are from Westchester, and actually from my office, and there are other supports that are being provided for them. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, and talking about Penn West specifically, I know there was also a transition with the president. Has a new president been hired at Penn West, and what are your expectations of that person as they sort of when did they start, if they have? And then what are your expectations going forward that person will be, capable of trying to get, stabilize enrollment and in fact get it back to where it needs to be so we can serve more students?
Yeah, so Interim President Bernatsky at Penn West has developed a very detailed, route map for the stabilization and ultimate growth of Penn West. They're making tremendous progress under her leadership. The council, she is going back to Westchester as its president July 1st. The search for her successor as president of Penn West is underway.
Okay.
I know for a fact that the search committee, I'm not on it, the delegated responsibility of the Council of Trustees, but I think I can speak to their desire that we continue to execute the plan that has been put in place because it is actually returning results.
Okay, thank you for clarifying, Chancellor. I appreciate it. And thank you for the grace, Chairman.
You're welcome. Chairman Topper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good to see you again, Chancellor. So just a little bit of history for the committee, as I was here during that period of integration. In fact, I was one of the legislators that penned the legislation of which we were talking about. So I can assure you, as somebody who was in many rooms during that time with the administration, with senators, with House members, with presidents, with the chancellor and his team, it was not rushed. It was legislation. This didn't just happen. And we're not talking about schools that were on great footing, and so we just decided, well, let's see what we can do. We're talking about institutions that, due to demographics and due to affordability, which, by the way, is not a one-way street, institutions have a great role in determining affordability for our students. So before we go down the road of saying affordability is just on one side, it is not. And so the decisions made by this body in conjunction with the system were meant to save something that was already in crisis because we valued the system. So I think that's important to lay out. And those in the room, and those who were part of those discussions, were certainly working feverishly against a great deal of hurricane force winds coming the other way to try and make that happen. Now, onto our current outlook of education within the system. Chancellor, we have discussed in the past the idea that in Pennsylvania, we are somewhat unique in the amount of institutions that we have, both whether we talk about our independence, our state system, our state relateds, and that it seems that if you were trying to develop a system from scratch, you would not have all of those schools doing the exact same thing. We know that in so many areas of our economy here in Pennsylvania, we have a workforce issue, shortages throughout. And since we are in somewhat of a brainstorming session, I'll pose this question to you. As we look at the future of our state system, which is the one system that we really have the ability as a General Assembly to create public policy around. We're very limited in what we can do with the state relateds, although we have a little bit of input there. The independents are the very nature of the word describes the amount of input we have there. But when it comes to looking at our state system and look, in all reality, did integration fix everything? Of course not. We're trying to move in a direction to determine what we can do as a state, what we can afford, and what we can also get a return on investment on. So at what point can we look at some of the schools in our state system or the system as a whole and say, is there any reason that we can't specialize? We talked about the old school in some of the system, the teachers' colleges, right? But knowing that every school needs to offer a certain basis of general education and then following up with what does it look like in terms of creating opportunities for specificity within universities and what they offer? What does that look like in a system? Are there other models around the country, as you have been versed on, that could guide us in that direction as we look for true transformational change and not just simply a dollar figure?
So in terms of diversification, if I can call it that, I think that's where we're going. So I can talk about how we're doing it at the Pennsylvania state system. It's not being done out of Harrisburg. When we redesigned the system in 2018-19, in order to achieve those two goals, credentialing, productivity, and financial stabilization, one of the things we did, we recognized that we're all part of a single family, we have a single budget, we're a single corporate entity, so that weakness anywhere in the system tugs on everyone in the system. And so we restructure ourselves so that our presidents are basically strategic partners with the chancellor in developing and implementing the strategy that is the system's redesign. So that's the first thing. Part of that is delegating to our university leadership, our presidents, a high degree of autonomy in determining the direction of their institution for a high degree of accountability to the board. Another critical part of that is that they're working very closely together, they and their staff working very closely together because they all have a vested interest in each other's success. We're seeing that play out at Penn West. And interestingly, with respect to the academic program, there are very rich conversations going on with our chief academic officers who have 360-degree visibility into each of their own program plans. And we have the capability of doing program sharing. What's interesting is that in and of itself is driving a degree of diversification across our campuses. Will every school or many schools have a business program? Sure, because it's a high demand thing. You don't just have one, and you'll see that in other areas as well. But there's also a number, you're beginning to see a number of kind of a degree of diversification playing out as a result of that process. I think that's fantastic. There are other models, they're top-down models. Penn State is one, and there are others. I don't think they would be right for us at the Pennsylvania state system. I think the one we've got is working pretty well.
Well, let's talk about Commonwealth and what we've seen in terms of increased opportunities there. Can you share some of those opportunities that students who I've spoken with on the campus of Lock Haven that says, we actually have more opportunities now in terms of what we've done at Commonwealth. Can you speak to some of those stories?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you see them in both places. There's a lot of, in Commonwealth, you're seeing, job fairs that were only available, I think, at Bloom are now available to everybody. There's research going on. I visited some research at Lock Haven Mansfield. It was all in environmental science. And it was interesting having conversations with the faculty as they're beginning to, this was like a year ago, as they're beginning to realize the opportunities of having more of them, that they can do more. You're seeing some really interesting, the Commonwealth in particular, they're kind of borrowing from each other in an interesting sort of way, so that there was this successful model, which I referenced before about student success centers, a one-stop shop where students could go. All of a sudden, they're showing up everywhere across the three campuses. They're actually returning results at each of the three campuses in terms of student outcomes. We're going to shift to Penn West just because there's another great example there, which was just brought to my attention recently. They have a lot of internship opportunities that they're now negotiating at the regional level, true at Commonwealth as well. And they're using housing reciprocity so that a student in one part of the state can get an internship over the summer in another part of the state, come and live in a residence hall in that other part of the state at the other campus. So you're beginning to see these things take root. It's cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Chairman Schweier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chancellor. Wow. Yeah, I'm just going to stick to what I have notes on. How's Cheney doing? Yeah, I'm fascinated that we've gone this entire hearing. We still have conversations trying to relitigate the past about the consolidations, the mergers, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Your enrollment numbers are bad. Certainly in one of those schools, we have ongoing concerns and problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The one school that was in the most financial difficulty legislative intention, legislation that merged the schools, consolidated the schools, excuse me, was Cheney. And we're still experiencing a lot, and that's still the one school that nobody's talked about today. I'm concerned about it. So can you give us a high-level, quick update on where we're at with Cheney, I would argue, the very unfair Middle States conversation around their accreditation, which is hurtful to not only the student body and this historic institution. Can you give us a quick, high-level update on that?
I would say unfair. I think I would say gut punch. I think I put that in something that I.
Yeah,
That was undeserved.
I don't think those are mutually exclusive terms, but I agree with you.
I just wanted to reinforce the point.
Sure.
So look, I mean, Cheney is operating under HCM2, which means that it has to retrospectively claim its student financial aid, which means it starts out every year with like a $4 or $5 or $6 million cash flow problem. That's not good at a school with a budget of $28 million. Right? That's a big deal. Right. And you know, son of a gun, under President Walton's leadership, they have managed to balance budgets since 2019 anyway, despite that, right?
With the tuition freeze.
Correct, with the tuition freeze. I mean, obviously, you know, generosity of the General Assembly has helped Cheney too. But you know, and so we're seeing improvement in enrollments. We're seeing improvement. We were seeing improvement in student outcomes. There's a little bit of a hiccup which is occurring now because some of you were here. I was not. They eliminated the football team, and so a whole bunch of students left. So that's now showing up in graduation rates. That'll recover. So you know, Cheney's on this course. And then, you know, as part of the normal course of accreditation, visiting teams get sent in. They all come and they say, does Cheney comply with the standards of Middle States? And 2 teams have come in short order, and both teams said, yeah, here's some friendly advice on things you could fix, but you're in compliance with all the standard. And out of the blue, in September, bang, they get hit with a probationary. You know, and not only hit with a probation, it says you're not in compliance with any of the standards. Everyone's head's whipping around. We just had 2 teams in here saying we're okay. So, you know, anyway, to me, it's grossly unfair. I feel particularly for the people of Cheney because they've been, you know, this is a small school, right?
Right.
And because it's a small school, there's not that many people, right? It stands to reason. And they're killing themselves doing God's work, right? Trying to, and they're, you know, returning good results. And to get slapped like that just is grossly unfair. Sorry, end of comment. The last thing I'll say is that the fundamental challenge, and I've had this conversation with a number of you, has to do with their financial aid processing. The Department of Education put them on some kind of probationary status back in 2015, said sort yourselves out.
U.S. DOE. U.S. Department of Education.
U.S. Department of Education, thank you. Sort yourselves out, you know, and here we are some years later and it's still not, you know, fixed to their satisfaction. The Department of Ed conducted a review last year. They came up, here's some things you need to fix. Some of them were relatively trivial, some of them not. And so Cheney's kind of working its way through that.
And how is PASHE helping them? Are they helping them? And what more do you need from us to get them into a better place?
So President knows this, Council of Trustees knows, we're all in. I think we were all here, you were here, Representative Harris, you were here in 2018, 2019. And, you know, we went through an interesting journey and we got them to a place of stability. And I can tell you for a fact, it will not happen on my watch. That pisses me off. I'm sorry for saying it that way.
I will ask the chairman to give you the flexibility to say it pisses off in this instance. So thank you, sir. All right, moving forward, let's talk about the system as a whole. Where's the system at in terms of your overall debt? I know it was at one point in time $200+ million. I know it's not that high anymore. What's the system's debt right now?
It's probably 1.8 billion-ish.
Okay. We were trying to put, I don't remember what the dollar, and what's that, let me ask this. What is that impact on cash flow for the system?
So take $1 billion of that 1.8 out because that's the CSRS. We prepaid our pension obligation by borrowing a lot of money. So
Right.
You know, take that out. That's at benefit to the system.
Right.
So the rest is I'm looking it up because I have it. The rest is basically debt that's managed by universities or their affiliates, and the debt service cost. I will get you in the course of this. I have to go quickly.
Or you could send it to me and my staff later. I'm curious. So that was always one of the conversations we had when we had the federal investment. Should we be helping PASHE pay down debt, and the impact? I'm wondering if we made a mistake and in not doing that in years past, and what should we be doing moving forward to address that? If that is a more effective tool to try to help the system level set their continue to freeze tuition. I'm just trying to figure out what's a better investment for this committee.
It is, so the total debt in 24-5 is 189 million.
Okay.
And it begins to slowly kind of ramp down. By 2030, things get a little bit better. You know, if Penn West is an example, so the defeasance, thank you very much, the 65 million that the General Assembly approved, we're still working with DGS to get them to increase the capital, but that, if we're successful, ultimately will eliminate basically Penn West structural debt, which was debt service, which was about $28 million. That'll get it down to zero. Still leaves them with an operating deficit of 10 million, but man, they have a fighting chance on 10 million. 38,
Okay.
it's not possible.
If I could, and Mr. Chairman, if you don't, thank you, sir. Now let's move over to, and I think one of my colleagues mentioned, instead of talking about what the governor announced in his budget address and the overall long-term goal with the community colleges and PASHE systems and the unification of the systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you believe that it would be, at the very least, prudent, if not almost a requirement, for us to significantly lower that debt prior to any long-term conversations about any kind of mergers? I would ask the same of the community colleges, and I'm not asking you to, I'm not, just as a hypothetical, does it make it easier, cleaner, for us to look at debt? Is debt a significant impediment in some kind of merger unification of the systems?
Yeah, I mean, can I reframe it slightly as financial weakness? I think when you're taking entities that are financially weak and bringing them together, it's not exactly necessarily a slam dunk that they're going to somehow get better.
We might have seen that already.
I'm just saying.
Okay, so the answer is we should be looking at the total financial package debt as one of those significant weaknesses.
Correct. I would look at debt, deferred maintenance. I would look at technology, infrastructure. I would look at execution capability, you know, a variety of assets, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, for the indulgence.
Thank the gentleman. Chairman Grove.
Thank you. So we don't know a lot about a lot right now, but let's try to dive into what we do know. So last budget, the governor came out with this plan for higher education, right? Through that, at some point, they hired Dr. Kate Shaw to come into PDE and start this task force on higher education. And I assume you and your team have conversations with her over the past year, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And I know she met with me. We had a discussion. It was mostly a, what do you think about higher education? There was no, this is what we're looking to do. I assume she probably called the four appropriations chairmen, probably the four leaders and so forth. So, you know, this budget, before the budget address, he leaks the blueprint. It is a press release on what they want to do. That's the first time we saw anything. I assume it's the first time you saw anything on the conclusion of that task force.
So the task force, just to be clear, was really speaking at a principal level about things like affordability, workforce. It didn't go into details that ultimately, you know, so the results of the task force were sort of input, I guess, to the governor's decision making. That's what I'm told.
Okay.
But it didn't go into the kind of details that we've seen.
Details in the, well, the details we have in the blueprint. So you ended up being in the governor's press release and doing a video with the governors. I assume they asked you to do that prior to the release. Did you see the blueprint prior to that, or at what point did you decide to kind of engage with some public relations with the governors?
So this was actually easy for me because, you know, and again, maybe it's because of my age. I'm pretty zen about this stuff. You know, we're having a conversation about affordability, improving our workforce outcomes, and this is the conversations that we've been having. I mean, you've been here. I've been here as long. You know, you were here when I got here. We've been having these conversations for 5.5 years, and we're making progress. And this is just another opportunity.
Right, I'm not saying. I'm just at what point did they like approach you saying, "Here's the blueprint. Will you do some public comments with us?"
It must have been a week or so before, but the detail was, yeah,
Did you have the detail at that point, or?
I didn't have all of it. I had much of it.
So you had less than the press release.
A little bit, maybe, yeah.
Okay. So at this juncture, we now have the budget address, and they formed I guess, the continuation of a task force that is not made up of anybody from the General Assembly that I'm aware of. You're not on it. Are there individuals from PASHE on this task force working for, I guess, to develop how the $127 million is going to get funded, that kind of stuff?
So what I am aware of is 2 task forces. One of them is about system governance, and that involves presidents of the universities and the community colleges. And there's another one which is about performance-based funding, and I know that that involves members of our universities, staff, chief academic officers, I think chief financial officers, but I think there are also their equivalents from community colleges and state-related, and I think there's some representation from labor as well.
Okay, so the quote players are in there. I'll look at the 2 chairs of education. I don't think they're involved in those conversations. It's kind of odd because we have to finalize this and we're not involved in kind of those conversations on the outset. Kind of I don't know if it's a good thing long-term or not. All right, so it's good to understand kind of where we're at. Now, in the next 3 months, potentially, they have to come out with some decisions on internal structure for a new system and how 2 entities are going to get funded with performance measures. You already have performance measures. I think Jeff printed yours out. It's quite extensive, 138, I don't know. It's a lot, right? So you kind of have your metrics, but I guess they need probably adapted to community colleges, and then Chairman Toppers has been discussing metrics with the state-relateds for quite a while. But when we were looking at the consolidation for PASHE alone, I assume that took longer than a 3-month conversation to try to work out those details and pass legislation. How long did that take?
So when Chair Topper was speaking, I think we introduced, I think Act 50 legislation was introduced in summer 2019. And I think the board voted to approve integration in spring 2021. And the first enrolled class in an integration institution was in fall 2023.
Gotcha. So it was in a 3-month drill. It took a little while to get those details and work through it. Obviously,
I was 6'7" when that started.
Right. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure we kind of were clear on a timeline, your involvement, PASHE's involvement, and what the kind of final conclusion is in potentially next 3 months, hopefully not longer, but next 3 months before the witching budget hour is done. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Chancellor, my colleague already talked about Cheney, so I will move on from that. Tell me your thoughts on performance-based budgeting with regards to higher education.
Keep that on red. You know, performance-based funding is like not one thing. It's what are we trying to, what's the performance we're trying to accomplish? It goes back to what's the goal. So again, let me pivot to PASHE. So our goal is, our goals are sustainable enrollment growth with encouragement or incentive for success of low-income students, students of color, and success of students generally. That's basically, that's all that there is, and so the metrics are like, they're pretty simple. There are other performance-based funding approaches which are just wildly different. I mean, if you wanted to, we could develop a performance-based funding model to improve the production of volleyball players from private institutions. I mean, it's so, and then there's a pretty good research literature on you know what is good, what practices are good in performance-based funding. So, and I'm confident that will be utilized in the discussions that ensue. It can work.
What's your opinion on it?
If it's well designed and there's clarity around outcomes, and there aren't too many measures, and there's enough money thrown at it. I mean, you can't do performance-based funding on the margins, right? It can work, and last a piece of opinion, I think we do something which I think is right. I'm not sure we've done it completely right, but we take account of mission institutions aren't all the same, right? And so 25% of the total state allocation is distributed to universities by mission. Like a research institution, IUP, for example, will get more than, or a different amount than a public liberal arts college like Cheney. And so I think it's critical to account for those kinds of differences. We do that with the 25%, and then the 75%, the remaining 75% is purely driven by those enrollment metrics that I referred to. I think it's having the right effect, and those two effects are, A, it's improving enrollment and student outcomes. It seems to be improving outcomes for underrepresented and low-income students in particular, so that's good. And B, it's helping us continue the march towards financially sustainable operations. Those were the two objectives. It's only been in place 2 years.
Are you aware of the negative outcomes that performance-based budgeting has on HBCUs?
I am aware of negative outcomes that performance-based funding has on HBCUs and all sorts of other schools.
So how do you square performance-based budgeting as is outlined in the proposal with regards to the two HBCUs, one that's a state-related, one that's a state system school?
Again, I think that's a question for the administration. I can say what we did was we had a long and very detailed conversation about mission and the differential funding from the 25% of the total allocation, which is allocated according to mission, because it allows you, that's the room to have the policy conversation about, there may be good reason to invest more in a certain school. It's a rural school. It's a small school. It doesn't benefit from economies of scale. It's an HBCU, so it's a small school. It doesn't benefit from the economies of scale. It's a research institution, and it's a huge one, so it has scale, but it also has more cost. That's where that kind of conversation takes place, and I think it's the only way to sort of ensure that your policy objectives are baked into the performance-based funding. And there's a literature, and I will point you to it, Chair, HCM strategists. I actually believe Kate is, Undersecretary Shaw is using them in the conversations. They're the expert in this. They've written several reports, including one recently, which outline both good and best practice in performance-based funding. I'll make sure you get it.
Are you involved in the conversations around performance-based budgeting and its use in this new design of our higher education system?
I am not on either of the working groups. I'm obviously available to members of the administration. They all have my cell phone, so if they want me, they ask me. And
So
I'm
you're
happy
the
to.
chancellor.
Yeah.
The new proposal is this one board. I'm assuming you would still be involved, but you're not involved in anything currently.
So my understanding of the proposal is that it creates a new system, and that the community colleges and the PASH universities both become constituent members of that new system. That's all I know. My expectation is that that system, this is pure assumption, speculation, that system would have a board, and that board would determine whether it has who the chancellor is, that the board would hire and fire the chancellor. I am the chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education until such time as it does not exist.
Okay. With regards to the consolidation, when the chairman asked about increased opportunities, you mentioned job fairs and internships. Are those the only benefits that we've seen from the consolidation?
No, not at all. I think, Chairman, I answered the question about sort of student-facing experiential stuff. I think the biggest gain is that students at universities or campuses that would have been able to sustain maybe 20 or 30 academic programs, think majors, minors, degrees, now have access to 90, 100. So, I think, right, and, so choice is really important. Students want it, they need it. But it's also important for the surrounding communities who rely on those universities for the next generation of business people, nurses, teachers, everything. And so that breadth of programming is absolutely essential to those communities. So that was the driving logic to consolidation. It was the primary reason to do it. It's the benefit that we're seeing, most immediately returned. It was designed for that purpose.
Okay. I'm done. Okay. Seeing no further questions, Chancellor will thank you for joining us today.
Can I make one
You sure can.
comment? Thank you, Chair. And I won't go on forever, I promise. You know, first of all, I want to say thank you for a great conversation, but I also want to say thank you for your partnership over 5.5 years. This, to me, this General Assembly is one of the most informed bodies I can think of at a state government level on issues of higher education. This conversation is a rich one. You have accomplished a tremendous amount within your Pennsylvania state system, and honestly, obviously, elsewhere, I can only speak for the state system. So as you go into this conversation, I would encourage you to do it in the way that you have partnered with us, which is deliberate, thoughtful, and ultimately successful, I think. So thank you.
With that, I'll call this committee meeting to a close. I thank the Chancellor. We will be back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, where we'll be talking to somebody else. I do not. Who? I should have the scheduler. Hold on, let me pull it up. And I got my executive director here who doesn't have the schedule up either, so I'm gonna just blame her. Oh yeah, the Department of Aging will be with us. Good job. Department of Aging will be with us here. Seth, you ain't even say nothing either. Like, what you just sitting there?
It's my dementia.
Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Department of Aging. This committee meeting is adjourned.